In case that you get this ERQ for your final exam, the structure is going to be slightly different. So as always, you're going to have an introduction. In this case, you're going to state the theory, so the working memory model and the multi-store model, and also state the respective studies for each. So as you can see, working memory model and multi-store model. So then you're going to define one of the models. I'm starting with the working memory model, but you can do the multi-store model, doesn't matter. Then the study backing it up, the graph, then again with the other one, and at the end a similarities and differences, not the typical coda that you would do in other ERQs. So we're going to look at that as well. Starting with the working memory model by Baddeley and Hitch that focuses on short-term memory, let's have a visual representation. So the king or the CEO of this store of memory is the central executive, as shown by this wonderful crown. It controls the visual spatial sketchpad. It's, let's say, a slave system or subunit of the central executive, as the other two that we're going to show. It's divided into inner spatial, or where something is, and inner cache, how it looks. Then there's the episodic buffer and the phonological loop. So the phonological loop is divided into inner ear or phonological store that involves listening and reading, and the inner voice or articulatory control. Here are the written explanations and more or less what you would write. Some of this here wasn't shown in the diagram, so let's go through it as well. So Bailey and Hitch, they observed through lab experiments that when performing a dual task technique, so think dual, two tasks at the same time, in this case listening and watching, causes lower memory performance than compared to listening alone or watching alone. All right, with listening and vision involves visual plus verbal, so I suppose that's seeing and also having some text to read out in your mind. There is no performance decrease in this case, and this suggests the existence of the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonological loop. Going back to the central executive, so you also need to know that it has a limited capacity, retrieves information from the long-term memory, and it is modality free, so it can process information from your senses. It's divided into the automatic level, so schema reliant, and supervisory attention, which involves decision making. And the episodic buffer that we didn't look at very much before, just remember, has a capacity of 4 chunks and provides a temporary platform to hold information relevant to a task. Laundrie and Bartling investigated the effect of articulatory suppression, so the suppression of the inner voice or articulatory control, which you should remember is a part of the phonological loop, on the recall of phonologically dissimilar letters, which basically means letters that sound different. So the procedure is pretty straightforward, and so are the results in conclusion. So there's going to be a control group that memorized this list of letters that sound different. So for example, M and K, one at a time without any suppression, and the experimental group that experienced the articulatory suppression, which involves saying the numbers 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 non-stop. This study has internal validity due to the manipulation of the IV, which is the presence or absence of this articulatory suppression. So remember, the control group does not have the articulatory suppression, and the experimental group does, and this establishes a cause-effect relationship. It is highly replicable due to its highly standardized procedure, and the sample is bad, so it has low population validity because it only involves undergraduate psychology students. And lastly, it has low internal validity or less internal validity due to the use of an independent measures design, which remember is when different participants experience different conditions. So I wouldn't say it has low internal validity because it's actually a strength as well. So this gives it internal validity and this reduces its internal validity. Just remember this should be in PO format, so point evidence explanation link. There's flashcards to practice that in the description because this is not how you would write it, it's just a simplified version. The multi-store model states that if there's an environmental stimuli, it will be sensed and registered. However, if you do not pay attention to it, it will be forgotten. If you do pay attention, it will be registered into your short-term memory. And if it is rehearsed, it will enter your long-term memory. Then it can be retrieved and remembered. Also make sure to memorize the encoding capacity and duration for each of these stores of memory because you need to include it in your ERQ. So take some time to write this down if you haven't already. Let's look at the case study of HM. So this man had his hippocampus removed and his different types of memory were tested using a triangulation of methods. They saw that he developed retrograde amnesia, which means he couldn't remember past memories. In this case, I've written declarative memories, but you don't have to be this specific. And anterograde amnesia, so he couldn't form new memories. The duration of his STM was healthy, because remember that an STM will typically have a duration of around 18 to 30 seconds. However, he could not rehearse this information into his long-term memory due to damage. His motor skills or muscle memory was intact, also known as procedural memory, and his episodic LTM, which basically means his memory of past and personal experiences, was severely damaged, and his general knowledge of the world, also known as semantic memory, would work sometimes. So as a conclusion, there are separate stores of memory. So as we saw before, the short-term memory, the long-term memory, and they have localized functions because the hippocampus is responsible for the formation of declarative memories, which is basically any memory that is not procedural. This case study benefits from ecological validity because Milner did not create any artificial settings for patient HM. It also benefits from internal validity because the triangulation of methods that we saw before came to the same results when testing HM's memory. However, this study cannot be replicated because it is a unique case study, so it suffers in reliability. It also suffers in internal validity a little bit because the results we saw could have been caused by epilepsies and heavy medication intake that you should know from HM's story. If you haven't looked at it already, I heavily recommend doing so. Looking at the last paragraph, so I've written an equal sign for the similarities. So none of them explain memory distortion, like for example, the theory of reconstructive memory, and they don't explain the role of emotion in memory, like for example, the study of Magog and Cahill. So the working memory model focuses only on the short-term memory and its slave systems, but the multi-store model focuses on all the stores of memory. And another difference is that the working memory model argues that different sensory informations are processed differently. So visual is not processed the same as auditory, and the multi-store model does not mention any of that. You could also get an SAQ for the working memory model. So the structure would go like this. You would start with your first paragraph involving the keywords that we saw before, the study of Landry and Bartling, and we're going to look at this paragraph because it can be where most of us lose marks. So the possible exam questions involve, for the SAQ, would be these two, and the ERQ, as we saw before, it would ask you to contrast two models. The last paragraph of the SAQ is going to involve why Landry and Bartling proves the working memory model. We're going to do that trying to mention as many keywords as possible. In this case, we can only really mention the phonological loop and anything that revolves around it, because that's what Landry and Bartling basically looked at. It didn't really look at the visual spatial sketchpad or anything else. So I have different examples here. This is somewhat how you would write it, and as always, you're going to try and mention both conditions and the results as your evidence. So my point is that it supports the existence of the phonological loop. My evidence is the results of the study, and then I have some little explanations trying to mention as many keywords as possible. All right, so reading these should hopefully make sense. Any questions can go in the comments.